This story began with a strange kiss of a man and a girl. Sitting on the bed, they put each other in a hot embrace. "Why did you kiss me?" the girl whispered, to which, in response, a man squeezed her into a mattress and hung from above. "Didn't you use your strength so as not to be associated with the past, Letitia?" With a sly smile, the blonde handed out. "Please do not repeat it," the girl whispered bitterly, covering her eyes, and tears appeared from under the lush eyelashes. And then the man covered her mouth with his own. "I don't know how it happened," Letitia thought, feeling the taste of his kiss. "But in one thing I'm sure. I like how he hugs me tightly," the girl firmly decided, pressing her whole body to her chest. Now the story is carried away long before its decision, and in front of us is a completely different Letitia that froze from words. "Let's divorce. This is not a funny joke for the anniversary of the wedding," she answered, sharply setting up a cup of tea on a porcelain saucer. "I got a man whom I loved, really." In a calm tone, her husband, Astor Winchester, said, "She, unlike you, is an innocent, unrealistic woman." Astor continued, and from his words, Letitia clenched his hand into a fist. "How can you say that?" she cried out, jumping to her feet. "Do you want to use the name of your family again?" The husband sighed. "Certainly. How much money they invested in order to raise your business?" the girl continued, while the servants awkwardly watched a quarrel. "I paid with all the debts." Astor raised his voice. "What are you talking about?" Flight was amazed. "Do not pretend that you don't understand." The husband rubbed his head indifferently. "I returned the entire invested amount, although a little late," he finished, lowering his voice and looking into his wife's pale face. "Astor Winchester, you have always been like that," Letitia said in her thoughts, crushing her hand in a snow-white tablecloth. "I understood my guilt, as if it meant nothing." She continued all the same, watching how her husband carefully drinks tea. "Because of your late, my family lost everything." She finally expressed everything she thinks. "My father even went to extreme measures, as you can." At the mention of her father, her voice again broke into a desperate scream. "It doesn't matter in an aristocratic society if you have no money, but it is another matter if you lose your honor. My father went bankrupt when he could not return the invested funds in time, and, taking all the responsibility, committed suicide. The father invested in Astor because he was the husband of his only and warmly beloved daughter. Do you want to marry her again?" Suddenly, Letitia guessed, caught her husband by surprise, and he said in surprise, "What? I thought I did not know." Her voice hissed with boiling anger, and a second hand crushed the unfortunate tablecloth. "If not for her, you would not talk about divorce." The girl was poisonously continued, rearranging her opponent in her husband's arms. "Enough! I have no time to argue with you," Astor cut off with a wave of his hand. "Why not discuss monetary compensation?" "Stop talking about money!" Suddenly, Letitia shouted indignantly, which Astor definitely did not expect from her. "They will not return my father to me." With tears in her eyes, the girl continued, and in her soul already deciding that his meanness will reveal to everyone. But the next moment, Astor abruptly broke off, and Glesley gave Letitia a slap in the face, and she recoiled. "Even the late father-in-law would be shocked when you see you like that." Astor continued everything, erupting one cruel word after another. "I am already sick of your exits." From these words, Letitia touched the steamed cloak of his cheek, not feeling pain. "No one will contact you as a mistress if you are so emotional." Astor softened the tone, hiding his hands in his pockets. "I tell you, our marriage began to strangle me." He grimaced, waved his hand, as if driving away an annoying fly. "I lived with the feeling that I was haunted by a tax collector." From these words, Letitia turned pale, becoming a shadow of itself the same, and this miserable face brought me fury. And from these words, she dared to raise her tearful eyes to her husband. I felt the last scoundrel in the world. Astor closed his eyes, stretching his hand to his engagement ring. "So give me a divorce." Having pronounced with these words, he calmly laid a silver ring on the dining table. "I also want to be happy. To have a woman nearby, like everyone else. A woman nearby." He continued dreamily. Astor stumbled in half a word, slowly turning his back to his wife, as if not daring to look in her eyes. "And?" Flights repeated after him, as if arriving no longer here and not now, but in another place. I also want a child. Aster answered coldly, and his words sounded more painful for Letitia than a slap in the face. My child, who will look like me, Aster continued, considering his children's portrait on the wall. And you cannot have children. He finished and slowly left, leaving Letitia alone with his thoughts. And his engagement ring remained lonely, lying on the dining table, gleaming in the sunlight. The delicate sun rays lit up the garden. A light breeze fluttered the crown trees, and small mischievous birds chirped cheerfully. Under one arch, this wonderful garden, on garden swings, staying in deep thought, was Letitia. Without noticing it, she grabbed her stomach. Her thoughts were only about one thing. Child? How does he dare to tell me this? After all, the reason why I cannot have children is that you pushed me down the stairs when I was very small. Everything is fine, Aster. You did not do it intentionally. She calmly reassured him, baking her light blush. Yes, let me marry you and atone for the end of my days. Aster answered, glancing at her with tearful eyes. So you swore. He said that you would stay with me forever. Recalled Letitia Day by their Aster of the wedding. Lianka. So gently and loving, he called someone else's name and smiled when she touched his cheek. You are the only one for me. How can you do this to me? Letitia cried, returning to the real ones and covered her face with her hands. I did not know that you were here. Suddenly, the mother-in-law's voice came, and she saw how she descends along the steps in her husband's company. Mother! The girl's mother-in-law greeted a slightly trembling voice. Aster told you everything? She asked. Yes, but I can't get pregnant. Letitia was justified. Yes, I know. Mrs. Winchester sighed dismissively. The woman herself is to blame if she cannot take care of her body. And I'm glad that my son is breaking up with you. Go somewhere in another place. With a mocking smile, she advised her mother-in-law, to which her father-in-law and eyebrow did not take. Although I do not know where they will accept such a child as you. From these cruel words, Letitia felt herself drowning in the abyss. Dear, will you tell her something goodbye? Mrs. Winchester asked her husband, and he approached the girl. Letitia, child. He took her by the shoulders, and she felt uneasy from his rough grip. I know that you made every effort, but no matter how much the chick tried, he would not keep up with a stork. He finished with steel in his voice, and the girl was numb. I collected all your things and left at the entrance. Suddenly, the mother-in-law wedged between them and Mr. Winchester released Letitia. As the last service, I called the carriage. In the end, she threw the mother-in-law. I hope we will not meet anymore. Transport really expected the flying and gate of the estate, but this was not a carriage, but a simple cart without a coachman. As if only they waited until I signed the documents for divorce. The girl reasoned gloomily, examining the belongings dumped in a heap. But this is too little. Suddenly she realized her luggage. At least I came with a lot of things, and suddenly she was sharpened with her head with cold water from a bucket. And from fright, Letitia cried out, God, I'm not on purpose. A familiar, malevolent voice and a wet girl raised her head to the balcony. Sister, are you all right? Mockingly, Olivia Winchester, the younger sister of Aster. I did not think that someone was there. What to do? Surely you are cold. She could not restrain laughter and looked up at the parapet. I took care of your things, sister. Olivia continued the mockery, but the look for Letitia did not focus on this. This is a dress. The memory that remained for me from my grandmother. She hissed, not taking her eyes off the beautiful pink dress on Olivia. I don't understand what you are talking about. You must be beside yourself from shock. With a poisonous smile, she answered and turned away. I would like to spend you, but a little busy. In parting, Olivia waved a pen, moving away from the balcony, and added, I need to put things in order in the master's bedroom for the new guest. And Letitia froze from an unkind guess. Will my room be given to that woman? She thought, imagining how Aster shows her former house to her mistress. Wait, that's how it all ends? Letitia cried out, rushing after Olivia, but the servants blocked her path. In the end, in this house they treated me as a family? She asked her kneeling in front of closed doors. The radiant sun was flooded with the whitish light, as snow-white as marble. The walls of the Violet family house. Have you divorced Aster? The Dowager Senior Violet asked displeasedly, covering the scarlet lips with a fan of lemon color. Also on your wedding anniversary, the stepmother continued, glancing at her clenched and drooping stepdaughter. Sorry, all that Letitia could answer, with a tired and drooping voice. Her gaze was directed into the void. Did you not have enough irrevocable investments in your husband, and the fact that Graham went to extreme measures because of you? While you accused me of the fact that I became your stepmother, you decide to divorce? Senia raised her voice, slamming the fan. If not for you, Graham would have no reason to die. From these words, Letitia crushed a skirt. But the next words were more unbearable. Ah, yes. By the way, I heard your sister died of illness. It would be better for you to die at the same time. Letitia was numb. But the next moment, the stepmother's voice brought her into a breath. I went away, she said, piercing the stepdaughter with a cold look. What? But Letitia was confused, but Senia interrupted her, rising from the chair. Do you have no shame at all here? Get out right now, she hissed with poison instead of words, and poked Letitia by a fan. And don't even think to return. I lived such a stupid life until I lost the only person who was waiting for me. She remembered her father. Maybe it will be easier if I just jump into the river? Suddenly, she asked a question, being at the edge of the cliff. You are not alone. The familiar voice called out equally suddenly, and Letitia indifferently turned to its owner. But I will not look at it, Aster calmly stated, standing in front of her in the company of his new chosen one. Caution, do not slip. He carefully warned his mistress, offering his strong hand, and she accepted her. Thank you, Art. I will quickly talk to her and return. Lianka smiled, a girl with scarlet eyes and hair of lilac. As you wish, Lianka. Aster put her in delicate embrace, pulled her to him, and touched his lips to his forehead. Are you all right, Madame Letitia? Lianka was worried, approaching a surprised and confused girl. Today is a terribly cold wind. She noticed her mistress and carefully wrapped his flying with her purple shawl. If you do not mind, maybe we will go along the shore and talk? With a radiant, innocent smile, Aster's mistress suggested. There is something that I need to tell you, Madame Letitia. However, from such a proposal, Letitia pursed her lips. I hate. Letting said briefly and simply, with hatred, tearing her hand out of the hands of the culprit of all her troubles. The Lianka was bewildered in a bewilderedly dangling, looking at her thin, frozen fingers with an empty gaze. Madame Letitia! Finally, the word awakened from sleep, she said, looking up at the girl and came closer. I think you will be interested to know. Lianka surprisingly, strongly squeezed the forearm of Letitia. What happened before the death of your father? With a smile on the lips and poison in her voice, she whispered a flying in her ear. Now you look at me. The lover, with a very unkind, crafty smile and gaze, reached out. I suppose your late father was dear to you. Lianka's face suddenly brightened, and the smile became wider. Just look at your face. All that Letitia could think about is Lianka talking about her father? So Art beats you because of this? Lianka asked. But so fun, as if there was nothing terrible in her words. Relax and follow me. If he notice, then you will never hear this. She warned with a smile. And do not get too close. With a smile and squinting his eyes, added a Viano over his shoulder. I do not like the smell of stables. This woman is terrible, like a snake. Letitia, to trembling in her hand, squeezed her skirt. I remember how she seduced married men. Let's dwell here. Lianka decided, admiring the view of the river from the edge of the cliff, while Letitia was approaching. It's so cold here. She turned to Letitia with that former crafty smile and a predatory cold look. However, the next moment, Letitia fiercely and unexpectedly spread the opponent with a whip, sonorous slap in the face. This is for an insult to my father. Through an angry grin, she hissed, expressing nothing on her face except the charity to Lianka. And she, detached and silently, put her palm to her cheek, reddening from the blow, and stared in the emergency for the void. Since the courtesy's finished, Slavica said, let's start with what you call a conversation. The loud laughter pierced the overhanging silence. God, you are so funny, Madame Letitia, Lianka said with sympathy. Do you know what those people who resort to extreme measures should do before death? Lianka asked a question. We are talking about revising the will. Before their death, people want to fix their deep intentions. She continued. Of course not. Sluming her eyes slicily and cherished the impudent smirk, the vine answered. Without looking away from Letitia, your father tried to change his last will. To leave you all the state of the Violet family. She continued coldly. The question is, what will happen if before his death, the deceased could not do this? Lianka asked with mockery. Who benefits from this most? Like a thunder among a clear sky, a question was raised. And just as suddenly, one name surfaced. The eyes of Letitia widened, and her amazed face was covered with a cold, sticky ladder. Xenia! It flashed through her head. Xenia. It was from the lower aristocracy, having distant common roots with the Violet family. Recalled Letitia, she stayed in a poor position, her husband died of illness, and she had nowhere to go with her little son. At the same time, my diluted father regretted her and decided to marry a second time. Similarly, remembered Letitia, if my father revised the will, as Lianka says, she would not be able to occupy the position of the mistress of the house, Violet. This does not make you think about whether your father really resorted to extreme measures? Stepping to Letica, asked Lianka. And did the ex-spouse Xenia really die from the disease? With a chilling smile, Miss Snowser asked, Do not believe, check for yourself. The city in which Xenia lived was small, so there will be one or two people who know her. Why are you telling me this? Let the question dare to the question, while the cool wind teased the green branches. Firstly, I hate Xenia. She tried to seduce Aster, Lianka admitted, acquiring herself by the elbow. What does it all mean? Flight did not believe, staggered. This is true, Lianka answered calmly, breaking her hands. He did not look at her, but she still was in a lip, and once even sovereign him and began to take off her clothes. Well, the second reason, Lianka handed out, quickly and suddenly, getting close to the dumbfounded Letitia. And then she heard a champing sound, and then her own heart was beating in her ears. And she felt acute pain. That I feel sorry for you. With a vile smile, she finished the vine, clutching in her hand a dagger sticking out of the chest. A shocked girl in brawl, and somehow incorrectly looked at the blade, and his hand holding his hand. And then she led her back. It would be stupid if you died like that, without knowing anything, Lianka said, before pushing Letitia from the cliff. Goodbye, pass on hello to your late father. With a satisfied smile, a farewell shouted to the girl, and Letitia put a downhill in her cold embrace. But despite all the horror, she could only think about pain. My stupidity broke my heart, she thought humbly, smoothly, and inevitably dropping to the bottom lower and lower. For all of them, I sacrificed something valuable. She remembered her father's smile. My father, my family, even himself. Letitia closed her eyes, already taking the inevitable. But the next moment she felt the touch of someone's hands. Someone grabbed her face with his palms, carefully pulled him to him, and opening the cold mouth with his tongue, breathed life into her. Who? She tried to ask, but in response she heard a clear one. If you do not want to croak forever like a crow, do not open your mouth. And Letitia heeded these words. Yes, like that. The stranger said and kissed her again, giving air. Good girl. And suddenly everything was dispelled, like a nightmare, who in the end became pleasant dreams, and Letitia discovered herself in bed. This. Where am I? Such was her first thought, while the girl herself was confusedly examined by an unfamiliar ceiling. It seems that my wound was healed, she concluded, with difficulty rising from the bed and feeling the bandaged chest with her hand. You woke up. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from the side, and Letitia turned to her sudden savior. So annoyed to hug your shaking body every night, a stately blonde said with a grin, crossing his hands on his chest. You! Flights began timidly, but hesitated, equally timidly considering the man, and part-time the owner of this room. Are you not His Highness Prince Zionian, the miracle of the Westeros Empire? Nevertheless, she asked, remembering the familiar face of the blonde. Yes, right. Sunian once answered dryly and grimaced slightly, as if to hear his own title, and his name was not a joy. Why did you save me? The girl was voiced by the begging question. I am the first to ask questions here. Gionian cut off. You are the only legitimate child of Count Violet and Bride Marquis Winchester. From afar, the prince began an interrogation. Then why did you swim with a river with a knife in your chest? He finished, and Letitia shamefully looked down. She smelled a nightshirt, hiding the bandaged breasts, let it, and realizing that it was already too late to hide the wound. I stopped the bleeding, but do not grind. With these words, Zionian suddenly hung over an amazed girl. Stop! Letitia prayed helplessly, when the prince, without the ceremony, fell with his lips to her wound on her chest. My God, Mr. Zion! Suddenly, a dark-haired man with a monocle rushing into the room shouted into the room. The patient recently woke up, and you already bother her? The adultering adjutant, Langaro Mak Shang, asked displeasedly. Do you know who really worries here? Zion quipped, while his adjutant sincerely apologized to the embarrassed girl. I apologize, lady. He is quite good. Just a little on his mind. You must be surprised when you woke up. We are located on the passenger ship of the Westeros Empire. And as if in confirmation, Letitia felt the pitching and creak of the mast. Westeros. The Holy Empire west of Northland, where according to legends, the gods lived to the very end. Perhaps, for this reason, special people with the power of God were sometimes born in an imperial family. These were called Salt. Do not worry, we are not heading to the western continent. He reassured Langaro. What Letitia asked. What happened? Mr. Zion and I visited Northland and just examined the surroundings when we saw you, floating along the river. You were between life and death for almost a week. Langaro finished the story, involuntarily recalling the bloodied dagger. It turns out the salt heal people in this way? The girl suggested what Langaro answered awkwardly. Something like that, lady. Spending time very closely, small wounds are healed quickly, but your case was heavy. Sorry to confuse you. Have you told my family that I am alive? Letius asked, what Langaro replied that her funeral had already taken place. Funeral? She horrified, and the adjutant continued. Unfortunately, after the death of your father, you did not recover with depression, and they committed suicide, jumping into the river in front of the stepmother. He finished Langaro to tell the fiction of a shocked girl. She jumped into the river, in the eyes of the stepmother. A trembling voice was repeated by Letitia, crushing a silk sheet from a bitter resentment. But Mr. Zion said that you were wounded by a dagger. The adjutant reminded, and the girl looked at the waiting prince. Did your stepmother hurt you? He expressed his guess with his hands crossed, looking down at his guest from top to bottom. Of course, not a stepmother. She is the last witness. Suddenly, Langaro wedged in, to which Zion answered, Did I ask you? This is not Xenia. Letitia answered quietly, carefully touching the wound from the dagger through tight bandages on her chest. My husband's mistress, Lianka Snowizer, hurt me, the girl admitted, representing her in Aster's passionate embrace. Is this a girl with scarlet eyes? Langaro said thoughtfully. Right. Do you know her? The Letitia referred to what was refused. No, but my messenger saw her. He said that she was grief at your funeral. From these words, Letitia maliciously bit her lips. So, are you going to return to your husband? The prince's question sobered up the girl and found it by surprise, which was why she changed in her face. No, my husband, most likely also involved in this. She answered again, tormenting the sheet, and in her thoughts, plucking resentment and anger. Why should I die? These doves deserve death, and I will make them pay, and no matter what. Your gaze has changed. With a satisfied smile, Zion noted, thoughtfully rubbing his chin with his hand. After your words, I want to make you an offer, he said, and Letitia asked warily. Offer? I will teach you perfect revenge. Zionian was explained, and from the words heard, the fial eyes of Letitia were rounded. It will be so cunning that your enemies themselves will wish to death. With a cunning smile, the prince assured, holding out his hand to her. If you do, as I say, you will receive perfect revenge. He continued, and Flathia lurked his breath. Wealth, honor, and even your selected life. I give a guarantee that all this will return to you. The prince promised the girl. But this, I'm sure, has the price that I have to pay? Asked Letitia, a reasonable question, without raising her eyes. Price? Certainly, Prince Zionian answered with a grin, exposing the snow-white teeth, and gave the girl a satisfied look. The eternal death of Letitia Violet. He said, and Letitia was numb with his voice, which was like the ringing of a funeral bell. This is the price that I want. He finished Zionian, holding out his hand, as if already wanting to accept the payable. If something you want to do? Letitia asked, hiding her eyes from him, and ran her hand over the tight bandages. And I like your quick wits. The prince grinned, sitting down on the bed, and the mattress gritted softly. In Northland, there is a criminal who killed a person dear to me, he admitted, which sincerely surprised Letitia. To find it, I need someone who is familiar with the local society and can get the information necessary for me. And this role will belong to you. I will give you a new position and a new life. Zionian turned to the girl. Using power, I will change your face to someone else's, he said, gently touching the cheek of Letitia with the back of his hand. So those who betrayed you will not be able to recognize you, Zion promised. With a loaded tone, and Letitia remembered Aster. Will you really change my face? Is it possible? Not completely believing in what she heard, she asked carefully. Of course, otherwise not to be an omnipotent straw. With a bright smile, Zionian answered, as if answering an incredulous child. Why are you doing this for me? Letitia did not calm down, and from her question, the prince's face turned into an impassive mask. After all, your highness and I are completely alien, she timidly continued, not noticing how Zion again touched her cheek. Then we were able to exchange only a few words. Therefore, we can hardly exchange promises. Flight objected. Hardly? Zionian repeated, gently removing her chestnut curl by the pink ear, and stopped, as if admiring him. I remember then I gave you one important advice. He continued, taking in his hand a thin handle of Letitia, with its wedding ring. Run away from Aster Winchester right now. With a sly smile, Zionian reminded and bit the ring on her ring finger. And Letitia remembered. She returned to the Dincenti's estate, on the frosty winter day of his wedding with Aster. Have you seen it? She whispered one of the gentlemen invited to the wedding, addressing her gallant interlocutor. Sewell came from Westeros as a guest. The intriguing news spread among the guests and the nobles. And even more than that, Sewell was accompanied by the second crown prince, Northland Calix, with whom he was a solitude and led a conversation. They say that this soul was born for the first time in 300 years. One of the guests said, Neg has the power to heal people. I echoed the other. I did not expect to see him here personally. The third spoke out. These words reached Letitia, and she turned to the culprit of the gossip. This man, Zionian Saul Mayer Summerhurst, she reasoned, examining the prince that she was bored in her hand with a glass. Know that all this is thanks to me. Suddenly, Mrs. Winchester said, waved by a fan, which distracted Letitia from the guest. Since Queen Anna is my friend, we have the honor to accept such a guest. With a satisfied smile, the mother-in-law explained. She already wanted to order the cook to cook food in the Western style, but Olivia intervened. Mother, you are again for your own. This is so unexpected that you still need to prepare. She objected. I think he will like it too. Mother stood on her own. This matchmaker crosses all the boundaries. Suddenly she changed her subject and, hiding her face behind the fan, looked piercingly at the daughter-in-law. Could he not show more attention to his daughter's wedding? She was indignant, examining her son with drooping Letitia. Mother, enough. Aster and her father stood in a calm tone, which did not appear at the wedding of his daughter. Good, good, let it be your way. Mrs. Winchester surrendered, sighing heavily, and folded the fan with a click. When a woman comes to the house, the son immediately becomes a stranger. Finally, she shortened Letitia, and she guiltily looked down. Mother, why not say a congratulatory speech to our Western guest? Suddenly wedged with the idea of Olivia. If the Saul himself speaks, I'm afraid guests will not be able to say anything else, and they will only be shut up. This is a wonderful idea. Mrs. Winchester praised her daughter, in the blink of an eye inspired by her cunning idea. Then I'll go talk to him. Olivia shone with joy, and Mother let her go with a smile. Okay, go. Aster, look like a sister, shows an influence instead of a daughter-in-law. The mother-in-law switched to her son while Olivia was giving away. Letitia, look and study. She did not deprive the bride with reproaches, and she again lowered her eyes, clutching a wedding bouquet in her hands. However, very soon, Olivia hastily returned with a dissatisfied look, angrily attacking heels and minting a step. Sewell said that he would only listen to the main perpetrators of the celebration. She said on the go, "How arrogant." Asked her, "Why don't you go there personally?" With light awkwardness, Mrs. Winchester turned to her son. "I don't understand why I should do this." Astor grumbled displeasedly, which surprised the flying nearby. "If Olivia could not, then I." She indulged in internal torment, unconsciously tormenting her bouquet in her hands. "Let's do it, Astor. Let's go together and ask to make a speech." With a smile, she turned to her future husband. "Are you serious?" Astor answered her. "I think this would increase the reputation of the Winchester house." With the previous smile, Letitia insisted, "If you want it so." Nevertheless, Astor surrendered, which again surprised the bride, but also forced her to shine with joy. "Who is this here?" With curiosity, the second crown prince Calix asked, addressing the newlyweds who approached. And these are the main characters of today's holiday. He recognized the newlyweds and gave them a radiant smile. Astor Winchester and Letitia Violet welcomed the great salt and His Highness of the Prince. The bride and groom bowed. "Have you come again to ask for a congratulatory speech?" Instead of Prince Calix, the cold voice of Sewell answered instead of Prince Zionian. The prince of his companion pulled embarrassedly. "What, did I say something wrong?" The one objected calmly. "If we hear speech from the great salt." Astor began to explain, but already without respectful tone and with a prickly look. Nevertheless, his behavior and words only have amused the great Zionian, which is why his thin lips sparkled in a grin. "Well, well, are you serious?" he mockingly asked, leaving a glass with a bubble champagne on the armrest of the sofa. "I did not even really remember your names," Zionian said, which confused Letitia, but Astor noticeably tensed. "Are you sure that my speech will bring you good luck?" Zionian continued mockery and smiled just as mockingly to the newlyweds. "I have no luck for you. Go back," Prince Zion commanded, but for Astor his words were like a spit in the face. Silence hung over all four persons. For two of them, she was awkward, and for two other, tense. "I think you came to the wrong place." Through the grin, Astor muttered, creaking with his teeth restrained. "I made a mistake." He threw and turned around, headed away. "Astor!" He called out his Letitia, rushing after him. She wanted to stop the groom, taking her hand. But Astor angrily dismissed her hand, as if she was a viper. "I already told you," he hissed with a cold steel in his voice, sighing his eyes that would soon become his wife. And after that, he simply left, leaving Letitia alone and confusion to watch him and hear his shoes. "I did not think that I would get something that did not work out with Olivia." She began to reproach herself, covering her eyes. He left his wife only because he lost his temper. Meanwhile, Zion curled up, for which Calix pulled him again. "I'm sorry. It is already an honor for us to accept you as a guest." Letitia appreciated respectfully, fulfilling the curtsy. "Sorry to put you in an uncomfortable position with a request to make a congratulatory speech." She continued, "Lady Violet, you should not apologize on such a significant day." With an embarrassed smile, Prince Calix reassured her, "Please enjoy the evening." In parting, Letitia wished guests from the west, still in a bow. However, when the girl had already set out to retire, Prince Zionian suddenly stopped her. "Wait!" he ordered, raising his hand. "For you, I have a congratulatory wish." With a cunning smile, he held out, propping his chin with his fist. "Run!" This is what Prince Zionian wished, and Letitia sincerely dumbfounded, not understanding the reason for such a wish. "What?" She exhaled a question, feeling a cold drop of sweat rolling across her face. "Run! What does it mean?" "To express yourself literally, run away from this fool," Zionian explained, touching her naivety and confusion. "With this rat you will never be happy," he warned, pointing towards the Winchesters that they stood apart. From these seemingly cruel and unfair speeches, Letitia hardly swallowed a viscous lump in the throat. "I'll go," she quietly told the Prince Zionian, bowing to him respectfully and leaving him on it. "Here is a fool." Prince Zion dug in disappointedly, looking after the retreating Letitia, and raised himself annoyingly in the sofa. "Then you did not listen to my advice." The voice of Zion returned Letitia to the present, in which he removed her ring with his teeth. "Well, probably you loved this fool so much." The prince suggested, thoughtfully twisting in his hand her engagement ring. And this is how he repaid you for your love. In the appendage to the words, Zionian threw the ring on the floor and then rolled away. This is the same as pouring water into a bottomless pan. He continued, hinting at the bandages and wound under them. Can you really be able to carry out my revenge? Finally, Flithia dared to speak again, and Zion turned slightly to her. Yes. He gave his answer, with a rare, sincere smile on his calm face, and Letitia squeezed a sheet in his hands with excitement. Then, Your Highness, I accept your proposal, Violet Letitia strongly stated, looking directly into his eyes. The deal is concluded. Zionian Saul Mayor Summerhurst confirmed, rising from the girl's bed and headed for his former place. Now a kiss of my boot. Suddenly he declared, sitting on a chair and crossing his hands on his chest, threw his foot on his leg. What? Either was amazed or Letitia was indignant at the bite in bed, which slightly surprised Zion, but he did not give a look. However, Adjutant Langaro came to the aid of the girl. In our sacred empire, Westeros, he began with a smile. There is a custom to kiss the legs to members of the imperial family as a sign of the oath of unchanged devotion. The adjutant explained, this means the submission of your life to another person. He finished Langaro lecture, and Letitia realized that she had heard about it. The founder of the imperial dynasty Westeros was a demigod. She recalled, imagining the image of that demigod. He used his sacred power in order to get a special oath from his subjects, and since then it has become a tradition. As soon as you become mine, you can no longer be the Letitia Violet. Continued for the adjutant Zionian. This is good news, Letitia agreed, throwing off her sheet and carefully stood out of bed on the weakened legs. A stupid woman who suffered all the bullying until her husband's mistress killed her, she thought to herself, stepping shaking. A stupid woman who gave everything to the deceiver to her husband, she thought to herself, kneeling in front of Prince Zionian, an ungrateful daughter who destroyed her father. She thought to herself, bringing her mouth to a boot, polished to a shine. A great opportunity to erase all this. She decided to herself, kissing the prince's boot and dutifully falling to him with a brow. You said that you will realize my revenge. Please keep your promise. With a grateful smile, Letitia prayed. Letitia Violet Winchester, Zionian said, carefully clasping her face with his hands and hanging over a desperate girl. From now on, and until the end of my days, you will serve me. He brought his hand to her face on the back of which the symbol shone. Are you worried? Zion asked with a slight smile, while the warm, magical light from his palm was all filtered. A little, yes, Letting admitted, closing her eyes from the light and grimacing before the unknown, as if preparing for a blow. I'm not afraid that something is wrong with my face. Just... She timidly stumbled, crushing the hem of a nightshirt in her hand. So you are worried about the future? Zionian suggested, gently touching his hands to the face of Letitia. Will I be able to fulfill what your highness will order? She answered the question with a question, and Zionian thought, get rid of these thoughts. He ordered, taking Letitia by his chin and gently stroked his lips that was implanting blood with his thumb. Unlike a greedy rat that received too much, you are scared, he whispered, stroking her crown of coffee hair. Even if you fail, I will support you, he promised, breathing with her with one air so close to each other. I will not say that I do not trust you, but do not underestimate yourself. Fine? And with these words, Zion pulled away from the girl. Now Letitia Violet has gone forever, he solemnly declared with a satisfied smile, looking around the work done. From today, you are Countess Kant, Anaros Victoire, and you will live like her, Zionian said, admiring the new Letitia. In this form, even your parents would not recognize you. Zion spoke, while Anaros was now considering himself in the mirror. The same black hair as an aster. She noticed in her thoughts, running her hand along the long black with curls black. Facial features became sharper, and the eyes are more pronounced and bright. Has he really changed me so much, only touching me? It seems to me that it turned out well, right? Zionian turned to his adjutant, that all this time he humbly watched them. You look like a beauty from a famous picture, lady. Langaro smiled immediately, emphasizing the compliment with applause. Well, then go and bring the matter to the end, Zion commanded, hinting at the door, and the adjutant obeyed. Please follow me. Langaro went to the door leading to the bathroom, and Anaros followed him, but suddenly stopped and turned to the prince. Your Highness, thank you. The girl of her benefactor thanked and worshipped him gratefully. There is no need for gratitude. In a calm tone, Zionian assured, which surprised Anaros, and she raised her eyes to him. I only need your usefulness, he explained, walking towards the girl to meet, and ran his hand on the desk. Try not to betray me, Letitia. He reminded her of the former native name and took a black strand from her alien face. I did not know that you were familiar with His Highness. Langaro spoke out, carefully wiping Anaros with a velvet towel. We were not too close. She supported the conversation, while the adjutant set about her long hair, smoothing them with his hand. Perhaps now that you are in the same boat, you can no longer be called strangers. He noticed Langaro, ending his work. Here, let's put it on. With a smile, he suggested, trying on Ana Rosa a beautiful sapphire necklace to the swan neck. So, now I will tell you what you need to do. The adjutant got out, stepping back a step back and folding his hand behind his back. From this moment, you are the rising star of the secular society of County Kant, and you will live as their countess, Anaros Victuer. Therefore, throughout the next year, you will receive an appropriate education in the county of Kant. Then I go to the county of Kant? Reasonably suggested Anaros. Yes, sure. The adjutant confirmed. You will have to find out the culture, emphasis, and attitude in women's society from the first lips. He continued, and the girl remembered that the county of Kant is a country where any woman can take the position of the countess, if she has enough ability. This is a custom that is completely contrary to Northland, where women cannot freely transmit titles by inheritance. It is nice to become part of the county, which I always envied. Anaros thought, but then squeezed the forearm with excitement. I have never been to Kant's county, she admitted excitedly, and never left the limits of Northland. Is it nothing? In Kant, they speak the official language of the continent, and you speak this language at the proper level. Calm off, Langaro. But the county of Kant has its own emphasis. The girl objected. Don't worry, the adjutant assured, proudly aching. Let the year this time is short, but we will make every effort to your support. He swore, poked his fist in his chest. Another personality, altered appearance, and strong support. Anaros thought, with light sadness, looking down, I will repay His Highness for everything that he gave me. She firmly decided to herself, clenching her hand into a fist and pressing her to her chest. Will the wound bleed again? Langaro was worried, but the girl reassured him. I suppose this is from a long stay in the bath. Just in case, it is better to go to His Highness, the adjutant advised, looking guiltily at his ward. Not worth it. Everything is in order. Ana Rosa was embarrassed, covered in a blush. Do not be shy. Langaro smiled awkwardly to her. Let him be born with a tendency to cause inconvenience, but if it is better to know him, and you will understand that he is a light person. What do you mean? Anaros asked. I do not understand the meaning of the last word, to which Langaro smiled at her. This means that you do not need to try to please or like it. The only thing that excites him is benefit. He does not belong to people based on personal feelings, so he is not worried about what others think. Langaro's words accompanied Anaros all the way to the chambers of Prince Zionian. How easy is he, she thought. The girl stopped in front of a heavy door, but she did not have time to knock on her as the door with a creak came into motion. What's happened? In a calm tone, Prince Zionian asked, standing in the doorway and leaning on the door. My wound is bleeding again. Anaros answered, unlocked in embarrassment and timidity in front of the prince in an open shirt. I did not want to bother you, Your Highness, but Mr. Langaro said to come. She was explained, while Zion listened silently. Come. He answered briefly and simply, moving away from the door, in order to politely give way to the girl's way into his chambers. Then he ordered Anaros to lie down on his bed, and sank in front of her on his knee. He began healing. He again brought his hand to her chest, and again a warm, soft light shone from his palm, which gave her warmth and peace. Why does she heal for so long? She asked, feeling fatigue. There was something else on the knife. Zion answered her, removing his hand. But I'll say for sure, "This is not from a lack of my abilities," he assured, covering his eyes, as if feeling this invisible obstacle. "Thank you, I'm better already." "Thank you, Your Highness." Anaros thanked him, covering the wound with her hand. "This is the duty of the owner to take care of his horse," Zion said, and affectionately stroked the amazed Anaros on the head. Although it looks like how they stroke a dog on the head. The girl was embarrassed in her thoughts, invariably lowered her eyes. "But how long no one is affection for me?" she admitted to herself, recalling herself and affection of Aster. "Do you still have regrets from a past life?" Suddenly, Sionian asked, which caught the girl by surprise. "I left it not because I so wanted. They stole and trampled it all." Anaros answered, turning to the prince. "How did you get involved in this?" he asked, propping his chin with his hand. "You do not look like the one that will endure all the insults." "Maybe because it seemed to me easy," the girl admitted, clutching her palms in the castle from memories and excitement. "I have a question." Zionian curled, interrupting the hanging silence, and touched the Anaros's hand with his index finger. "Why are women in Northland so attached to husbands? I heard that in ancient times, the wives were buried alive after the dead husband. Now everything is not so bad. But this is still a rather conservative country," honestly answered Anaros. "So much that your husband with honor can be adulterers?" The question continued. Zion and the girl froze as from a slap in the face. The illegitimate connections of men, although not in honor, are not considered shameful, she admitted, shyly looking down. Until this does not question the position of the spouse or inheritance line, this is accepted. "What about a woman?" Zion asked the following question that the girl was confused. "What?" she asked. "What will happen if the spouse is incorrect?" Zion explained his question, and with crafty curiosity bowed his head to one side. "If a married woman makes adultery, she is sent to her parental house," Anaros answered, not raising her eyes. "And instead of the separation of property, she must pay her husband compensation, and her children from the lover are losing their rights to inheritance. It seems that high standards here are only for women." Printing, but also impassively concluded by Prince Zionian. "Your Highness, why are you asking?" Anaros now asked, sincerely, not knowing what the answer could be. "Because, among other things," Prince Zionian began from afar, smoothly sneaking up the bed closer. "I want to do this." He finished with an answer, hanging over the amazed Anaros, which immediately froze under him. "I heard now?" she thought, while her gaze froze on a grinning Zion, and her cheeks burst into a light blush. "You were kicked out before you committed marital treason." With these words, Zion gently took a naughty curl from her face. "And you will not have to pay compensation, because you are dead." He spoke, leaning closely at her face and looking into her eyes. "You have no children to deprive their inheritance," he whispered, stroking her waist, and Anaros hugged him back. "Since it is a novel, then with someone who is worse than your ex-husband." Zion exhaled in her neck and fell to her lips. "This is not progress, but regression," he said quietly, suddenly pulling the girl to him and putting in his arms, he put it on his knees. "In this sense, I do not think that I have an opponent." "What do you think?" he asked slyly, looking at her from the bottom up. That's just the answer was hot tears that suddenly broke from the eyes of Anaros and rushing off her face, did not fall. "My utility meant this?" the former Letitia Violet asked in a trembling voice, trembling herself with his whole body in his hands. "I'm used to what is treated as a tool. For the hard drives I was a puppet. For Aster, a dummy wife. But now I was born again and promised not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Yes, only the second chance gave me the same fate." "Excuse me, I better return to my room," Letitia said quietly, moving away from the prince's wide chest. She left his chambers too hastily, leaving Zionian only to look after her and listen to the removable cocoon of her steps. Letitia overcame the corridor rapidly, almost running past the puzzled Langaro, which noticed the girl's behavior. "Do you need to mock her like that?" From the threshold of the chambers, he turned to his master, experiencing sympathy for the girl. "Please be softer with her," the adjutant asked. "It was she who ran away without listening to me." Zionian objected in his manner. "Who makes an offer to pretend to be lovers?" He reproached Langaro on the tactlessness of his master, and there was nothing for. "Since I came, then figure out the clothes." Zion dismissed. You have not forgotten that I am the son of the Prime Minister? Langaro reminded. If you have not forgotten who I am, now shut up. Grounded Zion. Yes, you are not just a prince. You, soul. The adjutant nodded with a grin. In the meantime, he took up his master's open shirt. Zionian himself thoughtfully looked through the open door to the corridor. If this really worries you, why don't you visit her yourself? With an understanding smile, Langaro suggested. Then your plan will not be broken. Adjutant added, while Letitia was already surrendering to oblivious sleep in his chambers. But her dream was clearly restless, because under a thin sheet, the girl was covered with a cold later. Letitia, here! Someone in a nightmare called a voice, and the girl found herself on the banks of the river, under the full moon and night sky. Running is pointless. It came back, and Letitia turned around, and there she was waiting for her Lianka, following her with a dagger. Do you want to feel easy? She asked. But instead of scarlet eyes, darkness looked at Letitia, and this darkness smiled. And the next moment, someone's hand emerged from the thickness of the water, which grabbed the Letika's leg with a cold grip. But the girl only managed to cry out with fright, and at that very moment, she fell helplessly to her face in ice water. This is all you can? How did such a tumor hit our house? Familiar voices whispered, and Letica did not hold away tears. If you were not. In agony, her parents said that they pulled their hands from dark water to her. It would be better for everyone. Help! Letitia screamed, rushing from the ghosts away, but they continued to pull their long, monstrous hands to her. And suddenly, someone's familiar, strong hand grabbed her hand by her hand and jerked the girl out of the clutches of monsters and the dead. Aster? Flight said incorrectly, looking at her ex-husband from the bottom up, and he strictly looked at her in response. Please help, flying, marking frantically from horror, before the dead, forgetting all the bad things that this man committed with her. Letitia Violet. Aster spoke not with his own, but in the voice of that monster, and released the girl's hand from his own. And the next moment, Letitia felt an acute pain that pierced her breasts. After all, the monster in the guise of a vine overtook her, and then Aster leaned toward her face with a shock, and with a smile pronounced her mouth. Nobody will help you. And the nightmare finally ended with her own cry. Jumping in bed, Letitia grabbed her hands by the wound, breathing heavily. Only realizing that it was only a nightmare, she left her chambers, deciding to walk to the living room where the bar was. I will not endure it with a right mind, she decided to herself, sipping the first, attracted eye, a bottle of wine. What are you doing? Suddenly, Zionian's displeased voice rang out behind him, which caught the Letitia by surprise. Ka! The Letitia caught with red-handed, choked with expensive wine, and vividly settled the bottle in place. I look, you are a garada to drink when you have an unhealed wound. Zion reproached the girl, taking the bottle from her and from Sin away. The pain in the chest was so severe that I could not fall asleep. Letitia lied, not daring to look the prince in the eye. You followed to come to me? In your opinion, why are there no painkillers here? Zion asked, returning the wine to the bar regiment. All that the Letitia was able to say, guessing what the prince could lead to, and therefore she backed away timidly. But Zionian immediately overtook her, and did not ceremony turn the edge of the nightshirt on her, exposing the bandages that were reddened with blood. This is what happens if you drink alcohol. The prince dagged annoyingly, examining the blindfold scarlet with blood with a critical look. And also, without ceremony, and not asking for permission from anyone, he silently brought his open palm to his chest. And as last time, a magic symbol broke out on its back, and a warm light shone from the prince's hand. This light gave peace, driving away his chest pain and closing his eyes. Letitia barely touched the prince's hand. I am sure you are upset through my fault, she said guiltily, when the light faded and Zion removed her hand from her. Thank you. However, Zionian was in no hurry to answer. He silently looked at the girl, and in the twilight of the room, his eyes flickered with silver. Upset? He asked, finally casting a voice, and the Letitia squeezed from him, shamefully closing his eyes and bowing his head. This is not the right word, the prince continued, grunting disappointedly, and fell tiredly onto the sofa. Letitia timidly came closer to him, Sit down. Briefly, Zionian commanded the girl, but not imperious, but in a simple way, which gave the flying a grain of courage in front of him. We still have an unfinished story. With the previous smile, Zion recalled, and the girl was uncertainly approached. However, when Letitia tried to fulfill the will of the prince, weakness and a slight dizziness suddenly attacked her. Or are you so drunk that you can't move? Zionian noted the ailment of the interlocutor and grimaced, dagged with displeasure. I'm sorry, Letitia responded quietly, inside burning with shame and not lifting her eyes on the prince, clasped her hands helplessly. That's why I do not know how to joke. Zionian sighed tiredly, at which the girl looked at him incomprehensibly. Joke? She asked, and Zion reminded her. I suggested starting a novel because it is a means of achieving your revenge. Even if you return after a year of preparation in Kant, Northland is a country where it is difficult for a woman to act alone. A time may come when we have to use my authority. The prince continued to explain the careful Letitia. And if I plan to use you for as a means of achieving my own desires. Zion pointed to her with his palm. From the very beginning, I would not offer you a deal. Prince Zionian swore, firmly squeezing his palm into a fist, and when his words stopped echoing from the walls of the chambers, an awkward silence reigned between him and Letitia. Awkward. I was mistaken when I decided that such a man would want me. The Letitia reasoned, bursting with a blush. Without listening to you, I incorrectly interpreted the intentions of your highness. How could I atone? She said. I have already made my share of apology. The prince calmly answered her, covering her eyes. However, I did not receive an apology for your words. What can I do to forgive me? I asked Flight with hope, folding my palms in the castle as in a prayer gesture. And from her question, Prince Zionian smiled only with the corners of his mouth, but very enough, as if expecting these words from her. Kiss the mouth that pronounced you at the wedding. He slyly extended his condition, pointing his finger at his smile. And then I will accept your apologies. He finished Zion, and from his voice demand, Letitia was even more bored with a blush. However, the girl immediately prevailed over herself and quickly hid a gaze from the prince, excitingly rubbing his wet hands. You said that you intend to do everything for revenge. Zion reminded the girl to her oath. Or were these empty words? Number quietly, but firmly answered Letitia, and rested her hand in a soft sofa. With an effort rose to cotton legs. This is a check if I can cope with the role with his mistress. And this is not real, she thought, walking towards the prince. Your Highness, Letitia whispered, leaning toward Zionian and carefully putting her hand on his shoulder. Can you close your eyes? She timidly asked, sitting on the prince's knees, and Zion held the girl with his hand, feeling the heat of her body. You behave like a virgin. With a grin, Zion faked the former wife of the Marquise, and she flared up with a crimson blush like a candle. Sorry, she whispered guiltily, clinging her eyes tightly from shame and embarrassment, as before a jump into the unknown. Here? She asked and touched the prince's neck. No, probably. You should rise higher. He held out a little more. He prompted the girl while she gave him kisses all the way to his mouth and finally reached the desired goal. Do you do it intentionally? Suddenly, Prince Letitia interrupted, taking her hand and pulling him away in order to look into her eyes. Sorry, I have not done anything like it for a long time. The girl apologized confusedly. Can I try again? Prince Zionian fell silent on her words, staring at the girl's face intently before replying her. Fine. We will assume that I got an apology. Return to the room. He ordered, having fun and looking aside. As I thought, he experienced me. Letitia decided to herself, also looking away from the prince, but at the same time feeling annoyed. Good night, Your Highness. She officially said goodbye to Zionian, finally bowing to her. And the next moment, without uttering a word anymore, and no longer raising his eyes on the prince, left his chambers. Zion looked around, and only finally remaining alone, opened a shirt on himself. How hot. Indeed, under the silk cloth, the prince was wet as in a fever, which puzzled him. And why is everything burnt inside? But suddenly, Langaro entered the chambers without a knock. Your Highness, excuse me for an unexpected invasion. I got to lead from the palace. But what kind of lead he received? He said so. stopping at half-word and staring at the prince with a stone face. Later, I will submit a petition for compensation for moral damage. Please approve him. Langaro strangled with a displeased look. At the invasion and indignation of the adjutant, Zionian gritted his teeth and answered that narrowed, eloquent look. Come out, Langaro! Zion ordered irritably, pulling his shirt over himself, while his adjutant awkwardly looked away. The next morning began earlier than usual, namely, from the bright sun outside the window and from the loud homon of the voices from there. What will you do if you take control of everyone in this form? Someone's voice finally woke up. Why is the outside so loud? She thought, and got out of bed, cautiously peeled out from behind the door on the deck of the ship. And there, opposite the mast, Letitia discovered an elderly man with a beard arguing with the prince's adjutant. Langaro, Lady Victoire, did you sleep well last night? He was worried with a polite smile, turning around to the girl's call. All thanks to you. Letitia thanked, but then clarified, recalling the dispute of the men. Is something wrong with the ship? However, the men were in no hurry with the answer. The old man awkwardly coughed into a fist, while the adjutant also awkwardly crossed his hands. Dear lady, we have disturbed you. The old man took the floor. Do not worry, this is nonsense, just wait a bit. Yes, nothing like that, just the engine failed. The adjutant echoed him, with a carefree look of sweetening the pill. How much time will the repair take? Letitia was worried, for which Langaro was guilty of his forehead, and the old man pulled his gaze. I don't think we will lay down at an hour or two, the adjutant admitted, sighing annoyingly, but suddenly remembered something. Exactly! It must be constant staying in the cabin. You are burdened? He suggested, breaking his hands and came closer. Me? No, not very. Letitia was confused. Such a good weather. Why don't you take a walk in the port? Langaro suggested. When we leave him, you cannot return to Northland for a whole year. Perhaps you want to say goodbye. The adjutant continued. With whom, damn me, should I say goodbye? After all, you told me to leave the past behind. Letitia thought sadly. Wait, on board there are several dresses that you will be interested in looking at. Meanwhile, Langaro remembered. I am sure they will look good on the lady. He flattered the girl that burst into a blush. Please follow me. And then Letitia was in a luxurious wardrobe, sitting in front of the toilet table, while the adjutant was absent after dresses. I just can't believe it. This is my face, she thought, touching her cheek and considering a new one in the reflection of the mirror. Although my appearance could not be called non-casual, she continued, mentally comparing herself the former with the present.